Welcome to this week's Cattle Call. I'm Susan Littlefield here on the Rural Radio Network, and we're going to talk a little bit about, unfortunately, midweek. It's kind of like a Tuesday, Wednesday type of trade feel, so we're really waiting for this cash to fully be established. How much of that is going to wait because of the holiday that we had on Monday? But we're attracting some funds, and that's where we're going to start today with Brad Kooima. Brad, of course, is with Kooima Varilek out of Sioux Center, Iowa. So let's talk about these funds. What do you see it as you look at this week's trade?
Well, we've talked about it. Thanks for having me on, Susan. It's always fun. We've talked about this before. I think, 2 or 3, 4 weeks before this, where we saw this flat, boring, steady lower market, declining open interest. It didn't seem like it mattered whether we had an up day or a down day. It just seemed like it was like exit to the door, and the market needs a long speculator, in my opinion. I know that there seems to be others that don't really see it my way there, but I mean, compare it to the cash trade, right? You got a packer that wants to buy stuff as cheap as they can, and you want to sell it as high as they can. How's that working out? So you need to have the long speculator, and you need to have the natural long too. And I'm talking about the Costco's, the Walmarts, even a packer, for instance. People ask me, why isn't the packer long futures with the discount structure? It's a great question, and one that should be asked to the CME. But I've been waiting, thinking that, okay, now the funds are just about all the way down. The open interest got down to very low levels again. Are they going to start to come back? And yes, they will. Don't get too worried. And I've been really encouraged now as this market started back up on an uptrend that you've seen this accumulation of open interest. That's a good sign. That means the funds are willing to come back. Of course, some of these funds are trend following funds. Of course, some of these funds are, believe it or not, funds that actually do trade some fundamental news. And so I think that's an encouraging start. Looks like the market's trying to base out and make a low here, which shouldn't be the first time that we've done it this time of year. That's how it kind of feels to me, Susan.
But are we getting too heavy on these cattle at this point?
The weights are, that's the side of the market that is a little troubling to me and everyone, right? Particularly in my backyard, which is Iowa, Northeast Nebraska, Southeast South Dakota. We feel here, this is somewhat of a subjective comment, but we do not have heavy cattle here. This would be the time of year, we're farmer feeders. It's September, feed these calves for 10 months, and the weather's good, and they're as big as a house. The cattle are great, quality cattle, yada, yada. That is not really the case this year. What I saw around here was a willingness to sell because of the profitability that these cattle were. And wanting to grab a hold of some of that nice profits and get those cattle sold on a timely basis. But so the weights, the weights are the weights. It's a federal inspected slaughter. You got to trust that those weights are accurate. So I saw some interesting data this morning that maybe will help to explain it a little bit. This broke down the weights by region, Susan, and the major regions like you would expect. Okay, Texas, Kansas, Nebraska, and it broke out Iowa. What I see there, which is telling me, it looks to me like the traditional big corporate states, Texas and Kansas, the weights have just gone up, even more than seasonally normally does. Those weights always go up this time of year, but they've gone up even more seasonally than they typically have done. And when I visit down there, it seems to be, I hear a couple of things. One is that, replacement feeder cattle are way too high, so we decided to just feed these a little longer. Makes sense. Feed's cheap. It's certainly cheaper than it was. And then the other thing is, we had a pretty wide choice select spread for quite a while, Susan. So these guys on these formulas were probably incentivized by their partner, the packer, pal, that, hey, we're going to get more grade on these cattle, and the way to get more grade is to feed them longer. So, when I compare their weight charts to the Iowa one, Iowa looks like it had a heart attack. Our average weights in Iowa are sharply lower the last 2 weeks. They really were, which is somewhat a vindication to me of my subjective opinion of that. Boy, I just don't see any big cattle, and neither does the weight scale. So I continue to think that Iowa is still important. That this north area is still very influential in price because, as you know, we make up 25% of the supply, but our supply is much more variable than it is in the north. So I take that data as being a little bit encouraging, Susan.
Well, we saw the cash steady last week. Shortened trade week this week. Do we see cattle guys saying, maybe we'll just hold out? We want the higher money. We'll wait till next week if we don't get it.
The old rule of thumb used to be when you had a short for a long, in other words, a short business week. So there's 4 days this week for a regular long 5-day week next week. That typically you'd have a better chance of cash being higher that week. And the opposite is true too. When you have a long for a short, just less demand, right? Now, I was hoping last week we were going to catch and do a little bit better than just the steady cash bids that we saw. And I'm going to stick to my guns and say the same thing this week. I think there's a chance we could be a little bit better. I am encouraged also by the fact that I've heard multiple packers that have decided to make up for the Monday holiday by killing this Saturday. I don't think they'd do that unless they either had meat sold or had some decent profitable margins. So hopefully we can see if we can't get just a little better cash going here this week. That's still my expectation.
What do you see as demand at this point? I mean, we had some higher box beef prices. Is that going to continue now that we're kind of out of the official run of summer?
I've been encouraged the fact that they couldn't, everybody was telling me, well, we're going to take the beef down to 300 or less. It always slows down the week of Labor Day, blah, blah, blah. And now it seems to have stabilized again back up to this 310 level. I struggle with demand, these questions, because if I could figure this out, tell you what, Susan, we could really have a radio program, right?
Yeah.
Demand is, you can only measure by where we've been. Now, people say to me, beef's too high. And then I quote to them, I said, well, look at the retail price of beef. It's actually not much different than last year. In a lot of cases, the major cuts are at or below last year. Now, that's a two-edged sword. This isn't corn. It's a product that has a limited shelf life. Okay, a perishable type deal almost. So the higher you can sell it, the better your demand is. So I would say, is demand as great as it was at one time? Maybe not quite. But look at the last cold storage report. That was very positive. The number of exports that we've had, very positive. The spot that the American dollar in is also helpful. So, when you have these big hiccups like yesterday in the stock market, clearly, I've got it on my main screen right over here because that's important. What's going on over there. We got a couple of big reports, this employment report, the jobs report on Friday. I'm sure the market will be keyed in on that. So barring some kind of very deep major recession, I think demand is just fine. But yeah, stay tuned. It seems like cattle are always right in the front row of all that kind of news, right?
Yeah. Will the chart cleanups continue?
I believe it will. Charts have gotten quite a bit better than the last time you and I visited. I'm encouraged by that. I still, hang my hat a little bit on when you've got a discount structure like this is, if last cash is 184, you got front month trading at 179, you still got a lot of negativity built in here that, if we can surprise them by firming this cash market up here this week or next, I would think there's room to go here. So I choose to think the market's in decent shape right here.
And finally, as we wrap up, I've been traveling a little bit this last couple of weeks, and I've noticed a lot more empty feedlot pens. And you and I've had this conversation before that the cattle aren't here to fill up those lots. Is this you gonna see more and more in the next couple of months?
I get teased here in the office because I like to say I was there when we ran out, and obviously you're never going to completely run out. I got a funny story about that, but it's a family program. Some of that seasonal, farmer feeder feeds a set of calves, right? And then they get fat in the summer and late summer, like now, and then they wait, and in October, November, they get another set of calves. So some of that's a bit seasonal, but look at the way they overbuilt the feed yards. I couldn't help but wonder, like, Kansas is going to have this huge expansion. It's in the news. They're a big feedlot in Nebraska, right? The biggest one ever in Nebraska is coming out. I'm thinking, like, really awesome timing. Just when the supply of feeder cattle is going to be the tightest since 1950, we're going to build all this extra pen space. Clearly, somebody's going to have to go without, and we'll see. I hope as we continue to move that trend, I hope it's the guys in the South that go without, and as they continue to move these cattle back toward the north like they have been.
All right. Best way for folks to reach you, Brad?
kkvtrading.com is the website. The phone number is 712-722-0023. And no hiccups again. How about that, huh?
2 weeks in a row. Thanks so much, Brad Kooima, joining us this week. A quick reminder, commodity futures and options do involve a substantial risk of loss, not suitable to all investors. We'll take this show on the road next week for Husker Harvest Days. I'm Susan Littlefield on the Rural Radio Network.